The Kamov Ka-29 coaxial helicopter flies out in War Thunder. Let's see what it's got. The Ka-29 is actually based on a very old helicopter design, the Kamov Ka-25. The Ka-25 first flew in 1963 and was primarily intended as a naval utility helicopter able to operate from a variety of surface vessels. It was produced in a pretty good number of versions, including a basic transport, an anti-submarine warfare variant, a minesweeper, and a few civilian modifications as well. This led to the Ka-27 in the 1970s, which is what the 29 is based on. The Ka-27 was visually similar to the 25 and shared the same basic airframe structures, but was upgraded in almost every way. Like its predecessor, the Ka-27 was produced in a large number of military and civilian versions with a variety of roles, ranging from search and rescue to naval radar picketing. What we get in War Thunder is the Ka-29, which is a naval assault transport version of the Ka-27. This variant of the basic design was intended to operate from troop transport ships and specialized aviation cruisers to support amphibious assaults, both by transporting Marines and giving them close air support and basic anti-tank warfare capabilities during an attack. This version of the helicopter was built in pretty small numbers. Only about 65 of them were produced, including the prototypes. The Ka-29 first flew in 1979, and after a development phase, it entered service in 1985 aboard the Rogov-class amphibious assault ships, with most remaining in operation to this day, and some even having been upgraded to carry more modern systems, extending their useful lifespans by quite a bit. The Ka-29 can carry 16 fully equipped Marines, as well as external weapons on 4 pylons, in addition to a trainable minigun in the right side of the nose. The modern refits also added optional infrared countermeasure units, thermal diffusers for the engine exhaust, upgraded navigational systems, and a whole bunch of extra optional equipment. In War Thunder, the Ka-29 is in rank 6 of the Soviet and Russian tech tree at battle rating 9.7. The most obvious characteristic of this helicopter is that it uses a coaxial rotor system with 2 rotor discs which spin in opposite directions. The Ka-29 has no radar set, but it gets a ballistics computer with the CCIP for its rockets and guns, basic night vision without the thermal sights, and the SPI designator. That's what lets you designate missile targets and shows that red square in the external view. It also has a hover infrared suppression system, which are those funny-looking ducts that cover the engine exhaust which disperse engine heat, as well as an infrared countermeasure unit. These make the Ka-29 much more difficult to lock up with infrared missiles, and combined with the flares it gets, they give the helicopter a reasonable measure of defense against infrared missiles. Now for weapons, the Ka-29 gets 5 different loadout options with a combination of unguided rockets, anti-tank missiles, or gun pods. The S-8 KO rocket it carries is quite potent. These things have good range, are highly accurate, and have strong armor penetration for an unguided rocket. I don't normally single out the unguided rockets when I do these reviews, and on a lot of helicopters the unguided rockets are just kind of loadout filler, but these are a step above many of the others. Don't overlook them. Now, the only guided weapon on the Ka-29 is the 9M114 Sturm anti-tank missiles. These are semi-active command line of sight weapons, which means that they can either be steered in from your gunner view, or they'll focus on your locked sensor point of interest. They have an effective range a bit over 4 kilometers, and if you can score direct hits, they're quite potent. Another notable feature is a fixed, side-mounted 30mm cannon. This cannon can carry an APDS ammo belt with reasonably good armor penetration for a helicopter gun at this tier. Now, you won't be taking out main battle tanks through the front armor, but you can absolutely take out lighter targets with it, and still cause some damage to heavier ones. The steerable minigun in the nose is only 7.62mm, which really makes it more useful for scouting targets than for actually destroying anything. Now, the flight performance of the Ka-29 is pretty solid. The coaxial rotor design gives a very good response to the collective, and with careful controls, this helicopter can even do a barrel roll. It has decent speed, but accelerates forward a little slower than some of the other helicopters around its BR. One notable oddity is the yaw axis. Now, since the Ka-29 doesn't have a tail rotor, its yaw rotation is controlled by asymmetrical torque. That isn't a bad thing or anything, but it handles much differently from a regular helicopter. If you want to rotate in, directional flight, you're going to need to use a little opposite cyclic input at the start of the turn in order to spin the nose around the way you want. It's difficult to explain, and if you have trouble with rotation, it's not the helicopter, it's you. Practice in test flights and try adding some cyclic into your maneuver to spin around a bit faster. Another noteworthy feature of the Ka-29 is that this helicopter is incredibly stable, both in a hover and in forward flight. In fact, this high stability is part of what makes the unguided rockets and the 30mm cannon so effective. You can actually aim them pretty accurately, and they won't deviate too far off of the CCIP. Flying the Ka-29 in missions can be a bit tricky. One area where this helicopter definitely suffers is air-to-air combat. Its only guided weapons are anti-tank missiles, which have to be steered in manually. They can be used in air combat, but you'll find them difficult to hit with, and its fixed weapons are very difficult to attack moving air targets with. Going into helicopter battles from the sim lobby is risky. Those battles are a toxic slag heap of Ka-50 spawn camping more often than not, but if you can actually survive the spawn and get out into the fight, this is a pretty effective helicopter for taking out those ground targets. Its generous supply of ammo gives it enough firepower to easily take out 20 or 30 AI-controlled ground units if you aim carefully and if you can find them. Now, in close air support, the Ka-29 ends up being really fun to fly. I find that laser-guided missiles from other helicopters and regular gunfire from ground units end up being the primary threats. At this battle rating, I don't usually find myself going up against too many radar-guided missiles, and the infrared defenses, combined with a respectable load of countermeasures, let me avoid getting shot down by infrared surface-to-air missiles too often. But this helicopter doesn't really have any serious armor, so roof-mounted 50 cals can take you down with sustained fire. As with other helicopters, if you spawn at the start of the match, you'll be limited to the unguided rockets, which, well, the rockets on this thing are amazing, so not really a problem there. If you want to fly out with the guided missiles, you'll have to farm up some points in your tank first, just like with all the other helicopters. My playstyle with the Ka-29 is usually to get in close and unload rockets and missiles at short range, under 1 kilometer if possible. But if you take the Sturm missiles, you can absolutely do standoff attacks too, if you're careful with your positioning. Visually, I think the Ka-29 is a great-looking helicopter. It has a pretty nice paint job, and its coaxial design gives it a really nice, visually distinct shape that really stands out compared to most of the other helicopters we get in War Thunder. Landing the Ka-29 is different from a lot of other helicopters. Like most of the other Soviet and Russian ones, it has landing wheels rather than skids, which means that you need to be careful not to slide around after touching down. Also, the Ka-29 is kinda top-heavy, so if you have any sideways momentum, you might tip over. I strongly recommend using hover mode for landing this one if possible. To close out on the Kamov Ka-29 helicopter, this thing has very strong unguided rockets and can be effective in combat even with its starting loadout at the beginning of a match. It can carry 8 decent guided anti-tank missiles, and its coaxial rotor design gives it a respectable level of agility. Also, the 3-layered defense against infrared missiles can actually be effective and matter sometimes. However, it's got basically no useful armor, it's not effective in air-to-air combat, and it lacks thermal sights. The final verdict on the Ka-29 is that this helicopter is really fun to fly and is not just a stepping stone to the higher-tiered vehicles. This is a good performer in close air support, and if we ever get that helicopter PvE game mode, the Ka-29 will get a whole new level of usability. However, it suffers badly in the current helicopter versus helicopter battles, so stick to close air support. As always, thanks for watching.